just gonna... There we go.
What up, Mike? Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get a city love. My city love me back for my city love. I'm in Toronto.
Welcome to episode 1448 of Toronto Mic'd. Proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, the best baseball in the city, outside the Dome, with 8 championships since 1967. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making her Toronto Mic debut is Jane Harbury. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much.
You're one of the great...
Glad to be here, by the way.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, Jane. You're now an FOTM. That means friend of Toronto Mic'd. And I just want to shout out previous Janes who are FOTMs and tell me if you have met these people and how familiar you are. I think you're familiar with at least a couple of these people. You ready?
Yes.
Jane Siberry.
Yes, I worked with Jane.
Maybe a little more detail. Where did you work? When and where did you work with Jane Siberry?
Well, back in, I think, 83 or 4, I was at Duke Street Records, and I was the National Publicity Director. That was my title. That did not mean very much, actually, but the guy, there was some great friends that I made there, and including a longtime friend and client, Haygood Hardy. But I met Jane Siberry because we had Mimi on the Beach, that album, the first album. And that's where I met Jane. And we kind of, we see each other very occasionally when she comes to Hughes Room or wherever.
Sure. Okay, that is a famous moment in Toronto Mic'd history was when I pointed out to Jane the fun fact that the director of the Mimi on the Beach video went on to father the most decorated Olympian in Canadian history, Penny Oleksiak. So Penny Oleksiak, who's won more medals than any Canadian ever in Olympic history, is the daughter of the man who directed Mimi on the Beach.
I did not know that.
See, now that you know that, every time somebody mentions
I can
Jane
tell it
Siberry.
everywhere.
And in your opinion, Jane, is that a fun fact that I just shared with you?
For me, it is. I love trivia.
Okay.
And I don't call them trivial people, but I love that. Every year somebody gives me the Blue Jays daily calendar.
Okay.
And I love and I just today, like I was looking at the one for yesterday, and it said there was one season where there were 10. I think it was 10.
10 home runs in one game.
Eh?
I'm trying to guess your trivia, but I.
Oh, okay. And there were like, I think it was 10 of the rookies who were first season, and including Danny Jansen. And in my mind, Danny's always been there, so it's kind of surprising. But it was along with Vladdy and
of course,
and Bo and all
Bichette
that.
And Kevin Biggio and all these youngsters.
Exactly.
Jane, I love the fact you're a Blue Jay fan. So were you always a Blue Jay fan since they arrived in 77?
Well, I arrived in 66.
Yeah, but the Blue Jays arrived in 77.
The Blue Jays, yes. And I actually was very early because I was working for Quantum Records, which had Mad About Plaid and a bunch of other artists, and I got 2 of them on the Blue Jays singing the Blue Jays anthems, which was easy in those days.
Okay.
Not that them singing.
Which anthem exactly? Do you remember?
Which anthem?
Yeah, like, okay.
Oh,
You mean Oh Canada? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
okay, only because, so I have, here, we're going to get rocking here,
okay,
Jane.
Blue Jays, you got the Tony.
Yeah, so this is
cousin,
the OK Blue Jays the original 45 that was printed, I don't know, early 80s, I suppose. But when you said Blue Jays Anthem, I was thinking, oh my goodness, maybe it's OK Blue Jays.
No, it was the American and Canadian anthems. And in those days, and I think still, they have to... in those early days, they were actually live. I
think they're still live.
Well, they're not. They're live recorded because of the echo and the
dome?
time delay is about, I think, 6 seconds. When you record, you pre-record it. You have to have it that timed because
I did not know
of the echoes.
Okay, so you're here, Fountain of Knowledge, and just to wrap up the Jane Siberry and then get back to these other Janes. Oh no, it's okay. I love the tangents. I'm going to throw another one at you in a moment about OK Blue Jays, but. She did not find the Penny Oleksiak's father directed Mimi on the Beach fact to be particularly fun. She seemed pretty indifferent to it. And I was thinking, what does it take to get a reaction to a piece of trivia as a fun fact? I thought that was a pretty good one.
Yeah. I think Jane, Jane is a character and brilliant. And I truly love what she's done and how she's lived her life, but she's always had an opinion, and I don't know I don't know how much she loved the director, the producer, or anybody else, but she had a dog that she loved very much, I think called Wolfie or something.
Okay, well, she takes her art very seriously, and there is footage. I've seen the documentary about the recording of Tears Are Not Enough in 1985, and she's kind of sharing stories with Ronnie Hawkins and some of the cats there about cows. Like she was I remember there's a bit of footage of her kind of talking about cows.
Yes, she loved cows.
Clearly, actually, big fan of cows. Okay, quick fun fact about OK Blue Jays, and then we'll get back to the Janes. But do you know who's lead vocals on the OK Blue Jays, which is basically known as the Blue Jays theme song? Do you know who does lead vocals?
I've known this. I know that Tony Kozanek co-wrote it, I think.
I think you're right, yeah.
I don't know who sang. I do know, but I can't remember.
Keith Hampshire.
Right, of course. Who is a dear friend.
I'm having a good time if you already, Jane. Okay, a dear friend. Okay, and also, don't be. I know you won't be because you're here to share stories, but don't be shy. I want you to drop as many names as you have got in that jacket pocket. Okay, just drop names.
I'm not trying to, but it's just I have had such a history in the business. And Keith, you want to hear how I met Keith?
Please.
This goes back to I think '69. And I had been in theatre in England, and when I came here, Tom Williams, who is wonderful.
Attic Records.
Yes.
Just passed away.
No, Tom hasn't passed away.
Yes, he has.
Are you serious?
No, I wouldn't joke with. I would never do that. I would never do that to you.
When?
I'm going to say maybe, 12 to 18 months ago, he passed away. Yeah.
I don't think you're right, because we did the Al Mayer tribute at Roy Thompson Hall in the summer.
So he passed after Al. Like, Al passed first. That's for sure. But only because I
saw him and I hugged him, and everybody was so happy to see him.
Yeah, okay, so he did pass away. So I do these, for Ridley Funeral Home, I put together these memorial episodes, and I paid tribute to Tom Williams. He passed away at age of 79 on September 6th, 2023. So he passed away in September. So we've lost both founders of Attic Records now. And I never got a chance to get Tom on the program, but absolutely, Alexander Mayer's been on this program to share stories from Attic Records. I love those stories. Yeah, I'm sorry to break the bad news to you. I know
you did, and
I'm sorry.
I honestly thought that we were going to have Tom because he seemed so positive about things, but he had been absolutely through the ringer.
Well, he'd been attacked, and there's some tragedy there. Then sadly, he's gone. He died in Georgian Bay Hospital.
Oh dear. That's sad, very sad. I'll have to kind of figure that out.
And I know you have to process that in real time, so I feel awful. But I thought you knew because you brought up Tom. But again, my apologies.
No. I know I didn't know, or I would have not been so blasé about throwing his name. But he was a truly lovely guy. But okay, back to the story.
Sure.
He had the overnight show on, I think it was CKFH or CKL. It was, the studios were on Gloucester Street, just north of College.
Okay.
And he and Keith Hampshire and I would go in on the Saturday afternoon. He had the overnight show Tom produced. And so Keith and I would go in and we'd record commercials for the show overnight. I don't remember much more than that, other than occasionally Keith and I would go and drink sunrises or whatever afterwards.
Sure.
But that's
he's also from England, like yourself, because he was on Radio Caroline. He was
yes,
in
that's
the
where I
pirate
heard him
radio.
first on Radio Caroline.
So isn't that wild? So I want to, because I do. Again, I'm going to shout out a couple more Janes, because they'll be like, hey, you didn't shout it out. Me, Mike, what's going on? So after Jane Sibley, a couple more, but I want to bring you back to England, because I can hear the accent. I know you were born and raised in England, and then get you to Canada, and of course the Riverboat Coffee House. I've got questions. Other Janes I want to shout out very quickly here, and I do think it's wild though that you're hearing Keith Hampshire on Radio Caroline, and you'd eventually end up working with him in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Like, it is kind of a mind blow.
It is, isn't it? And really, I didn't equate it, because I listened to the overnight show or whatever offshore in England on the
Pirate Radio.
Pirate Radio, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, I want to shout out Jane Houghton.
Jane Horton, oh yes, a lovely woman and very smart. Oh my goodness, yes, and I see her occasionally, and Chris, her husband, but I'm not like in constant contact.
Because she had years on Q107,
right?
And then of course produced her own TV show, had great success, and now I understand she's a judge now.
A justice of the peace or something. I think.
Yes, that's what she is. Right.
Yes.
Right. Here's a Jane who says hi, because on Twitter today she said she's a big fan of yours.
Oh,
Jane Stevenson from the Toronto Sun.
Oh, I love Jane Stevenson. She's an absolute darling, and I see her. At the last time I saw her was actually at the day the week after Gordon Lightfoot died, and I went up to Aurelia for the Sunday, and Jane came up and covered it. Jane and I kind of, well, of course we've always known each other because of her doing music for the Sun, and she was one of the people who was an early fan of probably one of the most important people I've ever worked with and known, was Lasse de Sela. Do you remember her?
I don't. It's not ringing a bell at this moment. I feel great shame. Remind us who are we talking about?
Okay, Lasse de Sela. And she was the most magical person. She was the most magical person. She grew up with her father, who's a Mexican professor, and her mother, who's an American actor, and they grew up. And the four girls of the family grew up and traveled in a school bus around America.
Okay.
And Dad would do whatever. This is at my understanding. Dad would do whatever it took to clothe and feed the girls. They squatted in a lot of places, and he would like pick melons and that kind of thing. The girls were like they are unbelievably intelligent and well educated, but in their parents' way. So then they were mother was pregnant with Lasse, and Lasse was born in Big Indian, New York. This is a bend in the road called Big Indian. They were squatting in a house.
Okay.
Mother went into labor, and the father said, okay, we'll get you to a hospital. But there was no hospital because it was a bend in the road, but called Big Indian. So Lasse was born, and was born very, very, I think, normal. Comparatively for a family that was living life on the edge kind of thing. Her birth certificate read something like born Big Indian 00000 whatever number, because there was no other place. Right. Anyway, so the parents traveled, and Lasse at about 14 started singing, and they would go to places in San Francisco, and she loved the jazz and blues, and Lasse spoke many languages, but she was brought up in English and Spanish, and then she made it to Montreal, and fell in love with Montreal and found her home place. And then she started singing in various places. Lasse, I have my first platinum album my only platinum album, actually, but my first gold album. No, maybe yes, the first. But anyway, I have my first platinum album for her first album that I worked for 2 years, called La Llorona. And that La Llorona is a mythical creature who apparently turned people to salt or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, so Lhasa found a label in Montreal, or they found her, and they signed her for an album. And La Llorona is her first album. And I was contacted by Denny Wolfe, who was he was the director and the A&R for the label. They had Brand Band 3000 and...
Of course, Drinking in L.A. That's an anthem over here.
This is like a kind of a you-me thing. So Denny Wolfe called me. I was recommended to him. And this would have been in 1996, I think. And he said, she's a gypsy. And I said, what do you mean by that? Can you send me some music? He said, no, I'm coming to Toronto and I want to sit with you. So we made an appointment, and he brought a cassette tape, because that's what it was in 96 or 7. And I listened and oh my God, this album is... I said, I want to, and I said, I want to work with her. What do you mean by gypsy? Because I had in my mind big earrings, and she wasn't far from that, but she was much more than that. So then Lhasa met me because she wanted to meet who was going to be steering her career, really. And I was given 6-month contract. So it would have been like in October.
Okay.
And we were going to release the album. The French album was another thing, but we were releasing in English in March or beginning of April.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never had the luxury of 6 months for an album set up and be paid for it.
Right.
And I got copies of the album well ahead, and I sent out to... I knew that this album was going to be huge because it covered so much ground musically. And everybody embraced it. Jazz, world, folk, everything. Everybody embraced Lhasa's album. And so I said, we need to bring her here. And at that point, Richard Mills was at Feldman. And he and I talked, and we talked about we needed to do a launch. So I called Sybil Walker at the top of the Senator, which has become the Jazz Bistro. And I said to Sybil, can we have a Monday night, because they're usually dark on Mondays,
right,
for media? So she said yes. And then I said, can we please put a hold on a couple of nights after that, because I have a feeling that we're going to need it. And Denis was all up for it, and he brought the band here and blah, blah, blah. I couldn't fit everybody in on the Monday at all. So we had the people doing interviews the next day, television, the whole thing. And so we had one media night that was everybody came, and they were blown away. And then the second and third nights were public, and we had lineups of people outside from that one day.
Wow.
And the album went platinum, and eventually, so my contract was extended for another 18 months to top up at 2 years. Lhasa's sisters, her 3 sisters from her mom and dad, moved to Montreal, and they had gone to circus school, and so they did circus training, and then they decided that they were going to do a circus in Europe. So off they went, the 3 of them, to France, because they spoke French, as did Lhasa.
Sure.
And then so they did the circus thing, and it was a single ring, and they traveled and they squatted and they set up, and they picked a puppy up on the way, and I mean, it was absolutely a classic story that kids would love, you know. And so then after we kept going with Lhasa, and they got a deal with Warner, I think, in the States. but she was kept so busy in Toronto, and she did Lilith Fair, and she won a Juno for the album the first year, and everything went nuts. And then after the second amount of time, she said, "Okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to join my sisters in France to join the circus." So Warner's, I don't think, was very happy in the US because they'd invested a lot of time and probably money on setting it up in the States. So so Denis and the team at the label said, "Okay, we understand." And so off she went to France, and she traveled with her sisters, and she loved the whole life, and then she started writing some songs again, and she came back after 2 years over there in Europe, and then she was like Iceland, Finland, Chechnya, all these countries. UK went nuts for her. Wow. And so then she came back and she did the second album, which was a much different album called The Living Road, which she was very proud of. And off we went again with her in Canada. And she basically said to the label, "I want Jane," which was it was a mutual thing. I didn't want anybody else to have her because I understood her so well, and she understood me. So we went and we did a second go round, and then she got into the States and did a lot of shows, a lot of jazz festivals headlining, and she headlined the jazz festival here. It was actually her and Madeleine Peyrou, and I wasn't. It was on the City Hall property, and I wasn't actually sure until I got there whose audience it was, because Lassa had been gone for a while, and it was all her. Wow. And Madeleine Peyrou. I mean, I know Madeleine has a lot of fans, but I never got it. So I was really happy that it was my artist, if you like.
Well, Jane, now you're discovering some of my blind spots. So I'm just I apologize in advance for these great artists I'm like learning about today, because I don't know if they weren't played on CFNY, I missed it, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Fortunately, there were a lot of ex-CFNYers who did remember, or didn't, no, not remember, but did find her.
Good. No, amazing. But now I'm going to bring you back. So here's what we're going to do. So firstly, just to set everything up, I was introduced to you by another great FOTM, Kim Hughes.
Oh, yes.
We met at Pamela Wallen's cat book launch in the Junction.
Was that really the first time we met?
That's the first time I met you in person. Yeah, I always read your emails. I can't
believe that we never crossed paths.
No, I don't believe it either, except Kim Hughes has introduced us, and it was fun to see Kim Hughes there, and it was great to meet you there. And I'm like, Jane, you got to come over, and we got to share stories here. So we're going to get you to Canada. I guess 66, that's when you come to Canada, 1966?
I think it was June the 5th or 6th, 1966.
Okay. Now, did you, out of curiosity, last night, did you watch any of the Oscars last night?
No, I didn't, because I was having computer difficulties, and my friend, we had gone down to the Rex early for the 5 to 7 show, and that was wonderful. You will remember the Leslie Spit Trio.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, Laura Hubert.
Okay, yeah.
And she was playing with one of the most brilliant duos. So it was Peter Hill on piano. Peter could play anything, does play anything, and brilliantly. And Kevin Clark, who's a great trumpeter, who's based in New Orleans now.
Okay.
And he was blown away, and so it was nice.
You had a great night. So I did notice watching the Oscars last night, a lot of British accents on that stage. Like there was many an English accent I heard. I feel like the Brits might have cleaned up last night if we do the math on that one.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit just about your life in England before you come to Canada, and what brings you to Canada, and if you always knew you'd work in music. I'm very curious.
No. Oh, okay, yes, I can tell you why I came to Canada. I can tell you what life was like and how I eventually got to Canada.
Yes, please.
I was brought up in we were the family loved music, and we were brought up by our paternal my father's mother and my dad. I don't know whether that's paternal.
That's paternal.
Maternal. Okay.
With a big P. Yeah, the father's paternal.
My father's mother. Yes. So we were basically brought up in with her being the kind of Victorian woman who was amazing and had never, the family, my dad's family and I think my mother's family too, were both I would call them upper middle class, you know, and dad was a major in the army and towards like in the last couple of or 3 years of the war, and Granny and our mother. I have half brothers in England, so I don't want to hurt them. But our mother, and they're my mother's children. But it wasn't. I think my mother wasn't very responsible, and she couldn't cope with 3 or 4 of us actually, and so she wasn't in the picture from the time I was about 7, and Granny told us. My grandmother told us, don't ask Dad about your mother because it's too painful for him. So we as children of a certain era, like we obeyed Granny.
Sure.
And so when we were all in boarding school from the time we were 8, all three of us. My brother, the fourth one in that relationship is actually not my dad's. He wasn't my dad's son. Or Dad wasn't his father. But Dad apparently didn't know until divorce court. So Mum took him.
On Facebook, we say that it's complicated. Absolutely right.
Yes, it's very complicated. And it sounds like a movie itself. Anyway, right. So I grew up and I was very, very good in things I liked in school and lousy beyond rotten at things I didn't because I didn't care, like
right.
math and science and any of those things. So at 15, Dad was called into the headmistress's office, and she said, "Mr. Harbury, this is a waste of our time and your money. We suggest that you let Jane leave school and do something with her life." So I mean, we were allowed to leave at 15 in England.
Okay. So
I'm sure for Dad it was not a thrill to have that news. For me, it was like freedom. Yeah. So anyway, so the first thing I did was my grandmother knew the buyer for the lingerie department at probably the most famous school in the store in the world, Fortnum and Mason's, and she got me a job as a junior, which I indeed was. I was probably mentally about 12, but not 15 or 16.
Right.
And so we had a uniform that we had to wear as juniors. And Mrs. Gorman was her name, the buyer. And Mrs. Gorman, in the lingerie department, Mrs. Gorman had underneath all the showcases, she had this huge drawer. And nobody was allowed to go in there except her. And so when the Duchess so-and-so or the ladies so-and-so would come in and they'd ask for Mrs. Gorman, and they were going to a week of parties or whatever, so they were trying to lose weight, and I played at it obviously, but Mrs. Gorman knew them very well. So when the corsets and the bras and all of the underwear would come in, she would remove the labels with the size and put a label that was a size or 2 smaller. And so that would be for the Duchess so-and-so, and she'd go, "Oh my goodness, I'm so delighted I've lost so much weight." She was waddling, right?
You know, this was a plot in Seinfeld, right?
Yeah.
Jerry wanted to be size 31 waist or something, and then
and they took Mrs. Gorman as vice. Oh, that's funny. So anyway, so there was that, and as a junior, I basically did kind of what I wanted. I made friends with the porters who would have to take the food that was for sale on the food floor. They would take it in the elevator upstairs at the end of the day to put in the fridge so that it would be okay for tomorrow.
Right.
And I'd time my break or whatever, and I'd go up in the elevator with them, and they'd say, "Here, take sausage rolls. Here, take this, that, and the other." So I figured that out. And then I left there, and then I went to Kent County Council as a baby carer in the home, in the Kent County Council home. And the children were from like 2 weeks, 3 weeks to 4 years or something. And I loved that. And then I kind of got excited by the love. I love children. I always did, except my own family. You know, it was like we fought a lot, but that's okay. That's family, right?
Right.
And then so I decided that I would like to. I could be a school matron. So the school that I got as a junior, because I was still a teenager, was a school in Derbyshire. My brother had gone to this school. It was what we call a prep school, which is 8 to 13-year-olds, and then he had gone to the what we call public school, which is called private school here, and it's a very old school. I think 900 years old, called Repton, and so Martin had been to both, and he had just left by the time I got to be the matron, which is a good thing because it would have been really hard to be rough or kind to your brother, right?
Right.
And so I was there, and I learned a lot in a year or 2 years or something. I learned a heck of a lot, and then I decided that I was worthy of my own school. And I think I was 21, maybe, and so then I applied for a school in Middlesex and got the job as I was the matron, and. There were two matrons. I wasn't the head matron at that point. So there were two of us, and we basically, I think, were fairly equal. And I learned a lot there. And there I met the Della Quartet, the Della Consort, pardon me. The Della Consort was an amazing group of men. You know, there was a countertenor so they played all over the world, and I didn't meet them really. I just met their family because their family was part of the school.
Right.
And then I left there because I got my own school in Cambridge. I got 36 little boys between the ages of 7 and 14, and they were in my house. The boarding house. And I was responsible entirely for them.
Okay, now just so I understand. Now, is this like Edna Garrett in Facts of Life? Okay, like did you ever see Facts of Life?
Yeah, I remember that show. Yeah.
Well, like when you remember the like all girls school, and they were in uniform and they lived on the premises, and she was like the matron.
And these were little boys.
Okay, I'm with you now. I'm with you, little boys. Okay.
A lot of them were there because their parents were stationed overseas in territories that I don't remember or whatever.
Sure.
But I was responsible for them. They'd come home from school at lunch, and they'd have lunch in our dining room, and then I was responsible for surgery in the morning and surgery at night. And if there was a real problem, I put them in the sick room and call the doctor and blah blah blah.
Sure.
And you know, I did everything for them. I didn't wash their clothes. I sent the clothes to the laundry. We did everything. I did everything.
Right.
And I'm in touch with a bunch of them, my little boys. I mean, which is for me is extraordinary. And I found one of them. His name is Guy Buncombe in Cambridge, and I went, there's not going to be a lot of Guy Buncombes. I'm going to check and see if there's a Guy Buncombe in Cambridge. And I did, and I said, I don't know if you remember me, because I had it was a very turbulent 2 years in terms of the boy's health, and the family doctor said, you can't do this, it's too much. So anyway, so I couldn't say goodbye to my little boys, and so Guy wrote back saying, yes, I am the one, and I can't believe this, and shall we talk? And so then we Skype, we talk, and he has a gathering of that particular year,
right?
And I got to get together with them last summer.
Wow!
Yeah, that's so long.
Wow!
And they're now 70.
Wow!
Yeah,
because you were so young, of course. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, so that was what I loved. However, I had gone to theatre school in during the time I left school and did my other things. So I had gone to drama school, and I was doing this when it was 12 or 13. They wouldn't use boys in Shakespeare because the boys' voices couldn't have broken, and they they didn't like the boys didn't like having long hair, you know, so that they would have, I'd be a page boy, my liege, you know. Anyway, so I did that, and I came to Canada because, I'm missing a huge part here.
Oh, yeah, don't bury the lead here. Yeah, get that part cleaned up before we get you to Canada.
Yes. So our parents, our mother, our father and our grandmother were very staunch conservatives. And I always say, don't blame me for that. But anyway, so when I was 15 and after I left school, Granny insisted that I become a young conservative, which was 15 to 30 years old. And so every Thursday night would be the meeting. And every Thursday night, I would climb the elm trees where we lived, and I'd try and hide, not to have to go to the meetings, because I was a little girl.
Right.
And the rest of them were like 20s, you know. Right. And so Granny would always find me and make me go. And so I became a young conservative because it was a lovely group of people, and we actually had great times together. Then when we moved to Hampshire, I joined the Young Conservatives there, and they are my friends still, and I'm very close with a lot of them. And so one night we were at a pub. We were always doing our meetings at pubs, pretty much, and we were doing a debating thing. I was on the debating team, and my partner, my debating partner, is a woman who had moved. I hope she's still here. I'm not sure. She had moved to San Diego, and we were talking about because I'd had to leave the school, my own school, because of my health. Right. So she said, "You should come to Canada. You should come to San Diego." She said, "Because there's 11 guys for every girl." And I went, "Oh, okay." Of course, it's a naval town, so that was a no-brainer. So then. So we talked, and then I did go to the American Embassy or consulate, and they asked me what I did, and I said, well, I'm a school matron and I act, and they went, well, we don't have much call for school matrons. We'll put you down as file clerk.
Right.
So they didn't let me go to America. And then somebody said, well, you should go to Canada. Canada loves the Brits, you know. So I did, and I got the same thing. We're going to put you down as file clerk. So Dad had been with Sun Life of Canada for years and years and years, and had a friend who'd emigrated here, Jack Peacock. And Dad put me in touch, or him in touch with me, and said, when you, so I'm fast forwarding again. So anyway, they said, yes, you can come. So I went, oh, okay, whatever. I mean, I really didn't have the problem is I've never had a plan. I've just gone with what happened.
Right.
And that's really a blessing and
it occurs,
and I'm sure it was a trial for my father, you know. Anyway, so I booked to come to Canada, not knowing very much. And when in England somebody said, well, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. I'm just going to Canada. And so they said, well, maybe you should do Ontario because it's an up and comer. And so then they said, you should. I said, I don't know where I'm going. So I put a pen thing on a map, and it said Hamilton, and they said, don't go to Hamilton, go to Toronto. So no disrespect to that beautiful place, Hamilton.
The Hammer. Shout out to the Hammer.
Yeah,
and
really.
Tom Wilson and
Kerry Doole and all Laura. What's her name? She's beautiful, beautiful singer. There's a lot of great people there, and I love that town now. I really do, because I did a couple of Junos there, and people were warm and friendly and welcoming.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so they said Toronto. So I arrived in Toronto on the 6th of June or the 5th, and it was very, very hot. And I went to the Y. I'd never been in a Y before, and I kind of loved it. I thought maybe I'll move in here. You know, you had a cafeteria in the basement and grape pop. I'd never had that, and it was incredibly sweet and delicious. Right. And so then I had called Jack Peacock, and he said, come up to the house. And it was in Willowdale. And in those days, that was a 2-fare trip. And you could smoke on everything, all the TTC, which I did do then, but very, like maybe 5 a day. Cigarettes, that is. So anyway, I went up to Peacock's place, and he had a daughter about my age or a bit younger, and they had a lovely house with a swimming pool and blah, blah, blah. And he said, so what are you going to do with your life? I said, I just got here. Like I got here on whatever day it was. And what am I supposed to do? He said, well, you got to do something. Oh, right. Yeah, I don't have money to do anything. So he said, come down to Sun Life on Monday or Tuesday and I'll introduce you to the employment officer, Mr. Perkis. And so I did go down. And do you remember Mike Filey?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Loved reading his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, his wife was, they were engaged at the time. Her name is Yarmila. And she handed me the tests that I had to do. Tests. I left school not to have to do that.
Right.
But I did the English and I did the whatever. And then I came to the math and I went up to her and I said, excuse me, if my getting a job here is dependent on me doing this, you might as well let me go now. I don't do math. They had put me down as a file clerk in the Canada thingy.
Right.
And so then I was given a job in the office pool. There was I think 30 of us, and Mr. Roden was in a glass cage in the middle of us, and you had to use a card to sign in and sign out, clock in and clock out. And so I was given the job of premium things coming in, and I had to do something with them, but nobody really explained to me what. So then I figured it out sort of, and there were a lot of very patient and tolerant people. Really, I mean, I have to give them kudos. I can't remember who they were, but they didn't fire me. And then I learned how to do the Xerox machine. I actually got a certificate from Xerox for learning how to change a cylinder, and I was pretty proud because I never had much cut.
Do you still have that certificate?
No,
you should have kept that. Frame that.
I know I should have. I don't think I do. So then I also learned switchboard, and I loved it. And it was on the mezzanine floor by the Xerox and the postage machine. And I learned those things, and I had 15, I think there were 15 incoming lines and about 200 where you plugged into. So there were wires, plug in. And I loved this because it was on my own. I had my radio in with a speaker, with a...
What station were you listening to at
Chum FM.
Oh, it was not 1050?
No, Chum FM.
That was classical, wasn't it?
It was classical at that time. And then I went back to England for a couple of years later, and I came back and it had changed, and I even loved it more because it was all the music that I loved.
Right.
And so anyway, so I listened to that, and then the only time that anybody would come would be to bring me my check every 2 weeks or whatever. And I just loved that. And then after two and a half years, I went, okay, that's enough of this. Because people I'd met a photographer. It wasn't a relationship. It was at a party, and he said, I'd like to take some pictures of you. And I said, you can't get a good picture of me. I know that. They've tried. He said, I can. And so I don't have those. I don't have any of them. But he did do a good job, apparently. And I got back into acting. And somebody wanted to be my manager, a woman, Joy somebody. And I was going swimmingly, and I did a commercial I think it was for somebody jewelers, and it was meant to be a husband and wife in bed, but they had to have a line down the middle of the bed, so because it was a photography or whatever, to ensure that people didn't think they were actually in any kind of relationship other than husband and wife married. So anyway, so that, and then she came and she said, I've got a great script for you. Mm-hmm. And the shooting will take place in Maine. And it'll be 6 weeks, and it'd be a great opportunity. So I said, can I see the script? One of my rare sane moments, I said, can I read the script? She said, well, they don't normally let you, but they'll give you a scene. And I went, okay, I feel like there's something going on here that I'm not sure of, and I'm not. So that was probably the smartest thing I've ever done in my life, was actually insist on reading it. And it was soft porn, but It was porn.
Right.
And so I turned it down. And then I met a director, Sean Mulcahy, who was a fabulous theatrical director, promoter, producer. And he was doing a play at the theatre in Edmonton that Joe Schachter was the owner or whatever. He was the big guy at the theatre.
Right.
What the heck was the name of the? Anyway, it was in Edmonton, and a beautiful building, and it's the theatre moved to a new place years later. They built a big theatre, and so I auditioned for the not the lead, the second female lead in a play called "There's a Girl in My Soup" that had played London and Broadway. And
I know this. Yes, of course.
So I got the part, and Wendy Thatcher, who I'm still in touch with, she got the lead ingenue role because she was very, very young. She and I shared an apartment on Jasper in Edmonton, and we went to Tommy Banks on Monday night. We were dark, and that was fabulous. And then I came back to Canada, to Toronto. Now I have to go back to you to. Oh, no, I think I'm good. So no, I do have to go back to Sun Life. I missed the chunk here that's really key to the music.
This story, I'm enthralled because I know at some point you're going to end up at the riverboat, and it's
Yes.
like okay, it's exciting to me. Okay, we're going to get there. Okay.
Okay, so do you want me to go to there now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so when I was at Sun Life, the first fall I was at Sun Life, some of the girls in the office had asked me to go out places with them, which was really nice of them. I don't know that they wanted me necessarily, but they were very inclusive, and they're really good people. I don't know them anymore, but anyway, they said to it. So it was late October, early November, I think, in '67 probably. And they said, "Would you like to join us? We're going to a club." And in my mind, a club was a disco kind of club, but I'd never been to one of those either. So I said, sure. And well, actually, I probably said, thank you. That would be lovely. In fact, anyway, so it was very, very cold, and it was on Yorkville. And in those days, the hotel hadn't been built, and no big buildings had been built. So the wind came right off Lake Ontario, and it was frigid. So we get to this place, and we go down the stairs, and we walk in, and we say, yes, we'd like tickets for the show tonight. And they said, the person said, well, this show is sold out, and the second one, but you could buy tickets and come back for the midnight show if you'd like. This was a Friday night.
Okay. So
it was like, do you want to? Oh, sure, let's. So that's what we did. So I don't know whether we went to, I don't even know I don't know anything about Yorkville at this point, to be honest with you, other than we were there. So we waited, and it really was so cold. And we were let in at whatever time and walked in, and it's downstairs, and I think it was $3 or $4 to get in, which was a lot of money when you're making like $60 a week or whatever, you know. So we walked in, it was warm, but it was also filled with smoke because people could smoke in there.
Sure.
And so we were shown to the back of the room, a long, skinny room, with brass poles anchoring the tables and brass portholes with green gel to signify the ocean, right? And it was called the Riverboat. And we were seated at the back, which was fine, raised seats in a banquette kind of thing. And that was perfect because it was warm. And then we had to buy a drink. It was coffee house only. There was no alcohol. The nearest we had to alcohol was essence of rum for the cafe au rum. And so anyway, I think I had a hot lemon because you had to have something. You had to buy something for $1.
Which was a lot, because you explained, what you were making. Okay, so that's real money.
Yeah.
So, the artist, who are you there to see at midnight at the Riverboat Coffee House?
Well, I didn't meet Bernie that night.
Bernie Fiedler.
Bernie Fiedler, who started the Riverboat.
Yes.
So, at whatever time, the lights went down, and this voice came out of the speaker, and good evening, welcome to the Riverboat. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a warm welcome to Gordon Lightfoot?
Wow, there you go,
Yeah.
Gordon Lightfoot.
So out walked Rick Shea, Red Shea, pardon me, and oh my God, the fabulous bass player, and then Gordon. And that's truthfully when the magic started. So it would have been 67, maybe six. I don't think it was six. It might have been 66. I don't know, but it was certainly in the 60s.
Okay, amazing. So I have questions, obviously. So you're there. You're at the Riverboat as a guest there with some friends from work. Gordon Lightfoot.
No, not a guest. I paid.
That's what I mean.
Okay.
I meant
Okay.
you're not working there is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're
Sorry.
You bought a ticket. You're there. Gordon Lightfoot. And is this so during this performance, do you have this sense of like, I want to work around this environment, or what happens to you?
No, I just was, I was so blown away, and I was busy working in things, and so I looked at it as a wonderful night out. And actually, when they said who the name was, the girls, they said it's Gordon Lightfoot, and we had a jazz player in the UK called Terry Lightfoot, who's a jazz player and did all the big theatres and clubs in the UK. So I kind of had no idea who Gordon Lightfoot was. But that magic started. But it was like just a one-off.
Right. And
then a year or two, I think it's in 68 or 69. No, it would have been 69 when I got back from doing the Girl in My Soup in
Edmonton.
In Edmonton, and so I was going out with the guy who was doing the door, who I'm in touch with. I see he comes. He and his wife come to the Hughes Room shows, and Bernie comes up in break. Sonny, Terry, and Brandon McGee were the artists of that 2 weeks, because they always did 2 weeks twice a year at the Riverboat. Two amazing old blues cats, right, and hated each other and never spoke to each other except on stage.
Right.
Anyway, so Bernie came up in the break, and I'm sitting with Michael at the table where he could see people coming in at the door. And Bernie said, and I am absolutely convinced he wasn't doing it for anything other than just talking to Michael. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do. My dishwasher didn't show up. And I chirped up, I don't mind doing dishes for a night if it'll help you. And he said, would you? I'll pay you. So I did dishes. And then he said, can you come back? Okay. So here's the thing about that.
Yeah.
I had come back from, I was working as the spare matron at the National Ballet Junior Girls House, boarding house. So I was putting them to bed. So I do from like 4 in the afternoon when they got home from school until 8 o'clock at night when they had bedtime. So the Riverboat didn't start till 8 at the shows. So the first break would be not until 9 or 9:15 or whatever. So that would be good. So, and then I was also, started a boutique with a friend of mine on Yonge Street called Jane and I. And I was the Jane, obviously, in it, and he was the money. And so I was the schlepper who worked. And he and the English guys were importing dolly clothes. Like, the white that just showed up under the blue lights or the black light, the white dresses and things.
Okay.
And so he was great at this, and he brought in a friend, Ewan, who would put the girls into these clothes, and they looked awful in the clothes, to be honest, because they shouldn't be wearing them, but they really wanted them. And Ewan would stand behind them and hold the dresses and say, look, see, it fits you perfectly. kind of like Mrs. Gorman all over
I was going to say,
yeah.
Yes.
So
you know that drill.
So anyway, I was doing that. So I was the Jane, and I was there every day, and he was the buyer, and he put the money in, and I think I got money. I got paid to do rent and stuff. I don't know. I can't remember the money. That's my problem. So anyway, then I ended up, Bernie said, can you come back tomorrow? And I said, sure, because the store was closed at 7 or whatever. And the kids were in bed and lights out, and it wasn't my responsibility anymore.
Right.
So that was good. And then, the second waitress out of the blue said she was leaving. She wasn't there every night. It was only when there was a big crowd that they expected, because there were no advance tickets in those days. It was just people walked up.
Right.
So I became the second waitress, which suited me fine because I still had time to do the other things for a while.
Right.
And then Laurel, who was a lovely, I think is a lovely woman. She called me one morning and she said, and we had Jim Queskin of Jim Queskin's Jug Band playing, and he still plays. He's still on the circuit, in the States anyway. Anyway, so she called me and she said, "I'm leaving. My job's yours. I'm going to the Commune in Boston, with Jim," and so she left, and I took over as head waitress. And then Bernie realized that I was kind of good at what I did, and he made me manager. And so I was there from 69 to 74.
Wow. Okay, now we take a break here.
Okay.
So, because now I'm going to just riddle you with names that you may have crossed paths with while you're working at the Riverboat Coffee House, which of course is 134 Yorkville Avenue. I like your description going down the basement, and it's like a boat, right? Or like a
It was long and narrow.
yeah, like a submarine, right? Or
well, it kind of was, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what the portholes were meant to represent. I mean, it worked because it was so kitschy, but it was all in wood, and it was beautifully. Bernie had done a great job making it, but it was long and thin. It was narrow.
okay,
So the stage was on the east wall, and facing the narrowest part of the whole riverboat. And so I think there were about 100 and I think the capacity was about 120 or something like that. And I can name names. I mean,
okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Firstly, I was thinking, okay, there's only one song that we need to play a little of the song. But before I play this song, just for the definitive record, I'm going to ask you about two great Canadian artists who, were around those parts in the 60s. Did you ever cross paths with Joni Mitchell or Neil Young?
I'm afraid I have to say no. I met Joni at a party or two, but no, I'd have to say no. They had moved on by then.
They had moved. No, for sure. Yeah, Neil was down in California there. So, just a little of this, then I'm going to give you some gifts, and we're going to talk about the Riverboat Coffee House. This is Ambulance Blues.
Back in the old folky days, the air was magic when we played. The riverboat was rocking in the rain. Midnight was the time for the raid. Oh, Isabella, proud Isabella, they tore you down and plowed you under. You're only real with your makeup on. How could I see you and stay too long all along the Navajo Trail?
Wonderful Neil Young song, Ambulance Blues. About that scene, he shouts out the riverboat there in the first verse, and just talking to you about this time, which I'll never be able to visit. Gives me a little chills listening to Neil sing about it.
It gives me chills remembering how magical it really was.
So let me give you a few gifts, and then, like I said, I'm gonna mention some names, and you're gonna drop names, and we're gonna talk about your years at the Riverboat Coffee House in Yorkville, and then of course what you've done since then. I said, did you have an hour? I realized I'm gonna need a lot more than an hour. I realized because I didn't realize it might take that long to get you to the riverboat. Okay, but I'm loving it.
You should have shut me down.
Could never do that to you, Jane. Okay, so quick gifts here. Firstly, thank you to Palma Pasta. In my freezer, it actually just arrived when you arrived, the delivery. I have in my freezer a lasagna, so I'm happy to give you a frozen lasagna from Palma Pasta that you could enjoy.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
Delicious. Thank you, Palma Pasta. And
Yes.
fresh craft beer arrived from Great Lakes Brewery.
Oh,
delicious craft beer brewed right here in Southern Etobicoke. And
I love IPA.
you'll love the IPAs from GLB, and I could even stack that deck and get you more
Thank
IPAs.
you.
Actually, that's what I
Great
would do for you,
treats.
Jane. Great treats for you. I have a measuring tape courtesy of Ridley Funeral Home. They're in this community pillars, and they're wonderful. So you always need to measure
I
something.
love this because I always have to go and look for my toolbox. And I never find it.
My wife was using it yesterday, the Ridley Funeral Home measuring tape. You just need to measure things, and then it's right there. Okay, so thank you to Ridley Funeral Home.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the Riverboat Coffee House, which we're going to talk about right now, and you think about Toronto institutions. One is the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, which plays at Christie Pitts. So this summer, this tradition continues, Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. That book is the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. You know, you mentioned you like trivia about Blue Jays trivia.
Yeah.
Well, the best baseball in this city outside that dome is Toronto Maple Leafs baseball, and you're going to love that, Jane. It's a really great book.
Thank you. This is a huge, wonderful thing. Thank
I hope
you
you can carry it all. If not, I
hope I can.
bike it to you if you can't carry it all. One podcast for those, whether you manage your own investments or you have a financial advisor who does that for you. I'm all choked up talking about it. You got to subscribe to the Advantaged Investor podcast from Raymond James Canada, hosted by Chris Cooksey. Great advice, best practices, what you should do. I just bought tickets last week to see Neil Young at Budweiser's stage, kind of like a birthday present to myself. So I just listening to Neil in the headphones here. I'm just shouting out Neil. I'll see you in early July, so on the lawns at Budweiser. But
Have you seen him before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, you're a big fan, obviously.
I'm a big fan
Yeah.
of Neil, absolutely. So, last but not least, if you have any old electronics or old cables or devices, Jane, in a drawer at home, don't throw it in the garbage because those chemicals end up in our landfill. Go to recyclemyelectronics.ca. And you can find a place near you where you drop it off and it gets properly recycled. So thank you to recyclemyelectronics.ca.
Yes, that's probably the best advice that anybody could get.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're well taken care of, Jane. It was worth the
Thank
trip
you.
here to Southern Etobicoke. You got your pasta, you got your beer, you got everything set up
Yeah,
here.
I can eat pasta and get drunk on the beer and read the book.
Lots to do here. Okay, you've already dove into that Great Lakes, I hear. Okay, so Riverboat Coffee House. I'm closing my eyes like I'm there. Okay, so I'm going to just shout out some people I've met who I know played there. And if you saw them play there, let me know. But Murray McLaughlin.
Oh, of course.
Maybe a little bit about Murray. I'm starting with people who have been in this basement. Okay, so Murray's been over to the basement. Tell me about Murray.
Murray McLaughlin is, I think, the absolute world of Murray. He's a magnificent human being. I love his songs. Murray he has become a friend because of the years. One time I will very quickly recall, I don't think he was at the club to see somebody, and when you were in the kitchen, the espresso machines and the boiling, scalding milk, I speak of because that's the story. I was picking up, I think it was cappuccinos and 3 cups, walking out of the kitchen, turning left, and walking past the stairway that led to the women's washroom and the 2 what do you call them? Rooms for the artists.
Right.
Yeah, dressing rooms. And I was walking from the kitchen to the club holding these 3 espressos, not double those, or the cream. So it was really... And somebody came charging down the stairs and went right into me, and I spilled... He spilled like boiling hot milk
Ouch.
on me from here down to here.
Oh my goodness.
And Murray was there, and he took me off to the Wellesley Hospital because I did have burns.
Burns, yeah.
And so that was, and then I did go to Murray. The McLaughlin family were a big family, and one year Murray invited me to go to one of the brothers for Christmas Day, which was lovely. But Murray has remained a constant friend, and as has Denise. And
Denise Donlan, also an FOTM, of course.
Oh, you've had Denise here?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
She's a wonderful talker. she doesn't go like I'm doing, but it's a lot of recall here, and sometimes words escape me. I know
it's
where
your
I
authentic
was.
voice. I don't mind the ums when you're trying to remember.
Yeah,
something.
and it's trying to remember the simple word,
Sure.
Anyway, Murray has remained a real dear friend, and I'm proud to know him, and I love his songs.
What about just recently had on for the second time Ian Thomas?
Oh, Ian is another of the very best. I call him my petal, and he calls my flower. We talk in that language. He's a magnificent human being. I've done some independent work for Murray. He comes to me
Or Ian?
Ian.
Right.
He's written the books, and the books are fantastic. His books he's written, and he did some shows at I think the Westdale Theatre in Hamilton, and he asked me to help out with those. And he's on Alma Records, of course, so I get to do work with him when I do work for Peter Cardinelli. I haven't done any in a while, but life has been interrupted on many levels.
Do you think he's funnier than his brother?
Yes.
This is what I hear.
Oh,
Well, I've had Dave Thomas on, and I had Dave and Ian on together actually, which was really fun.
in 2019.
Well, they were on together actually just about 2 months ago.
Oh,
I'd say.
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And one thing I noticed is even Dave will say Ian is the funny one. So
He is. He's hilarious, and that there was a night that Liam Titcomb did for me in 2019, and Ian wanted to be there. I didn't know anything about this. It wasn't anything I had any control of for Hugh's Room, and I got really crazy because I wanted to know, because I'm nosy.
Sure.
A show from my night.
Nosy or curious? Because I don't know if I'm so nosy as I am I'm a curious cat. To bring it back
you
to Pamela
are, because
Wallen's book, yeah.
Yeah, you are a curious cat, obviously, and that's good.
Yeah, and you're scratching the edge here. Okay, so Dan Hill.
Dan, of course. Yeah, I worked with Dan recently on the last album he did. But I had worked with Dan this is a story.
Yeah.
A guy named Robert David, who was an artist who was playing at the boat, and Bernie, if Bernie was there, he would be the one who would say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't. But he wasn't, so I was. And Robert David, who is a lovely singer-songwriter and still is, he came to me and he said, I've got a friend here tonight. Can I give him can we do a guest set? Can he do a couple of songs? So I said, if you're recommending him, sure. So this kid, barefoot, with a shock of dark curly hair, got up and sang "You Make Me Want to Be a Father." And I'm going, how the heck does this guy even know about this, because I think he was 19.
Right.
And yes, so that I've known Dan
Hill.
for a very long time.
Wow, there's Dan Hill. Okay, now I got to be clear. So Bernie Finkelstein is the FOTM. So Bernie Fiedler we've been talking about, Bernie Finkelstein, the Bernies, of course.
Yeah.
So I haven't yet got this gentleman on the program, but I've been working on it for quite some time. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Maybe you can help. But Bruce Colburn.
Oh, Bruce. The first time I heard Bruce was in a place in Toronto, and I think it was on Queen East, and it was called Muldoon's. And I was sharing a house with Tim Thomas, who was a wonderful radio guy from Chum FM, and I and 3 or 4 other people were sharing a house, and so Tim said, "Let's go here. I want to go to this club and check it out, and there's a guy that I want to hear." And so I think this would have been like 1968, maybe, and so we went to this place, Muldoon's, and there was Bruce Cockburn, and that's where I heard him first. And then, of course, he did play the Riverboat several times in my time, and unbelievable. I love him too.
Look, we're covering a lot of the big names here. What about Ian and Sylvia Tyson? Did they play during your time?
They did not play during that term. Ian, of course, I did do work for on the Gravel Road album, and I knew him for a very long time. And Sylvia I've known forever as well, and I'm very fond of her. she played Hugh's Room, the old one, and I mean the Riverboat, of course. Well, I don't know that I can't recall if she played it solo or not. Maybe not, because I think maybe they weren't separated by the time the boat closed.
Right, the boat closes, for the record, on June 25th, 1978.
Yes.
Is when the Riverboat Coffee House closed. Now, that duo is Sylvia is the FOTM, just to be clear. But of course, as we discussed when I talked to Sylvia, her son plays with a guy you know quite well, and this is not so much talking. Now I was going to bring him up later because he did not play the Riverboat Coffee House. I'm willing to bet right now.
Right.
But but I was going to ask you about your relationship with James B. And then I'll come back to the Riverboat.
Okay, yes. And James is he's a very special man. he's an extraordinary go-getter. He's talented in the extreme. He's a lovely, caring person. He really is. And he does this wonderful thing every year for Unison, which is coming up in April. It's usually around his birthday at the old mill. And I help out there. I've known James for a very long time. I know James, actually. I know exactly where I know James from. He was on Quantum Records with the Look people.
Yes, that's where Ian and Sylvia Tyson's son,
Clay. Yes.
Right.
And I worked with Clay back in the late 80s, I think, or the early 90s, and he's another very special person. He really is, and he's so talented. And I think it was very hard for him growing up in a family of such talented parents. You know, I don't think it was an easy one.
Four Strong Winds is practically our national anthem in this country. So.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is, actually.
And to bring it full circle, a great version by Neil Young as well. He did a great cover of Four Strong Winds.
He did.
I quite like. Okay, it's all over the place. So, in your opinion, Jane, this is kind of a silly question, but do you think James B. is famous?
Famous. He is. That's a very good question.
Isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a recurring question on this program because it's a great debate. Is James B. famous? Because then it leads, of course, what is fame? And then you have a bigger discussion about, like, how do you define fame? Famous in what? Like, famous amongst us dialed-in people? But if you walk into you go to Islington Subway and you grab 20 random people and you ask them, do you know James B? How many of those 20 random people will say, of course I know James B? Like, yeah.
I don't think many. I think,
right.
I mean, he's that's a very good question, and I've never really thought about it because he's famous within circles of the people that listen to Jazz FM.
Of course.
People who love his crazy zany shows.
I think where I was introduced to James B was that Swingers revival that happened, and Much Music. James B would kind of get lots of play.
Yeah.
That, and of course, Lowrider. Sorry, the cover of a Lowrider.
Yeah.
From
that's a good question. I think James is maybe on his way to become way more famous because of his film directions, the films he's making. He's getting awards all over the world.
He might
for
be
the
getting
shorts.
awards, but Jane, the real talk here is that 20 random people we just pulled from Islington, not one knows a film by James B, right? Like, you might, if you got one, you'd be like, okay, there you go. Like, it's a great discussion.
Well, that's here. And probably
yes,
if you go to Germany or Switzerland or Japan, I think it might be a different story. I don't know
Big
that.
in Japan. Love it. Okay. So, love the guy, though. He's been over here several times. And I will shout out, because he was here just last week, Jay Douglas was here. And I just want to shout out Jay Douglas, because I know he performs quite a bit at these old mill events with James B. So,
Jay is a beautiful, beautiful soul. He's kindness personified. You know, he's got this one love is what I think about Jay Douglas.
He says it often, yeah. One love.
And he means it. And I think that, well, he's certainly got the chops. He's got he's got everything going for him. But I don't, I mean, how many people know Jay Douglas?
Good point. That's a good point. And, you're right, because it's hard to I call them the great unwashed, but the random 100 people that you select just from the cross section of the city, how many know Jay Douglas? It's a great question.
Yeah,
it's probably you can count on one hand, maybe.
I would think. Yeah, I mean, I think Yes, I mean, I think the fact that he goes over so well, he's received so well. I mean, I think he maybe has his best days ahead in terms of being known.
You know, and I have a gentleman coming on. I just want to promote a future episode. A gentleman who put together those compilations. One of which was called From Toronto to Jamaica, I think is the name of the compilation. But uncovered some old gems that were overlooked, and one by the Cougars. The Cougars being Jay Douglas's group back then.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Coming soon. Okay.
What's his name?
I'm absolutely going to tell you his name right now. I'm glad, Jay. I'm glad you asked. You can be my co-host on all of these wonderful things. But I'm going to just tell people this episode is happening. I'm here checking my calendar. When is this gentleman coming in? Kevin James House. So I don't know if he uses James anymore, but Kevin House. So Howse is his name, and Kevin is actually here tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m.
Whoa.
And we're going to be talking about all this stuff. So shout out to Kevin House. It was Alan Zweig who said you need to talk to Kevin, because Alan heard Jay Douglas talking about the Toronto to Jamaica, or Jamaica to Toronto, I think it's called, compilation. He's like, yeah, the guy who phoned Jay Douglas and asked if he could, put him in touch with this whatever, that's this guy, Kevin House.
Fantastic.
Oh, it's back to back. Some good Toronto music history happening here. Some more names here before I lose you here. Okay. I never had this gentleman on my show, and I regret it. And he passed away recently, utilizing Maid. Joe Mendelson, I'll refer to him because you probably knew him as Joe Mendelson.
Yes.
But we now, of course, he was Mendelson Joe. But
Mendelson Joe.
Tell me about Joe Mendelson.
I've known Joe forever, it seems, because he was what a character. I mean, he lived his life the way he wanted. Right. He would interview. He would offer people like myself, and I have a Polaroid of it to come and when he lived on Ossington, and he had a storefront, and I'd known him for. Because of McKenna Mendelson Mainline, really. That's how long I'd known him. And I went and he sat for him in his storefront, and still have that, a $300 Joe art for sitting for him. If I wanted to, I bought a painting of his. Actually, I bought one of the Olympic series. The Sculler, and I love it. And he was so talented, and he was so feisty, and he was such an old codger, and he was very appreciative of things that people did. He really wanted to get hold of Brian Ahern, who is a dear friend of mine. And Brian, and I made Brian reply. I mean, I didn't make him. I did really make him, actually, come to think of it. But he was happy to, because he did love Joe. To write to Joe, return to Joe the letter. And so Joe was always writing letters, as I think you probably know. He wrote letters to editors. He wrote letters to people he liked, people he didn't like, people he was angry at, people. He wrote me a letter because he got angry with me at one point, and he said, "You've disappointed me you didn't get back to me," or something. And I was like, "Oh, Joe, I'm busy, and I should have, and you're right." And I felt bad. But Joe was multi-talented, and he lived his life the way. And I understand he was happy in a marriage towards the end, which is wonderful. Well, not the first marriage; it was over.
Right.
But yeah,
quite a character there. Yeah,
great character.
We don't make him like that anymore, right? Today it'd be emails. Okay.
Yeah.
So before I get to some American names real quick here, I had Brian Good here, and we talked about the Good Brothers, and I read somewhere about Jim Croce playing with the Good Brothers at the Riverboat.
No, he did a guest set.
Okay, so you were there for that, of course, right?
Yes, and it was another one that I think it was probably Bruce, it wasn't Larry. It was because it was the first time they played, I think, was James and the Good Brothers. James Aykroyd and Bruce and Brian, and Larry wasn't old enough at that point, the banjo player, and then the Good Brothers did play, and of course they played all over the city. Sure. I remember going to the Elmo one night. They were playing upstairs, and Margaret and Crystal, who were two of the wives. Margaret still is the wife of Bruce. And we drank tequila. And we had to ask the boys during the break for more money to buy more tequila because we drunk so much. But anyway, yes, they played. But that night, they said, "Can we give a guest set to?" And I don't think I can't remember if he was famous yet. I
like pre-message in a bottle or whatever.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
So anyway, so I said absolutely he can play a guest set, and he did. Don't mess around with Jim, I think it was.
Oh, Leroy Brown, is that
Leroy
it?
Brown,
Yeah, Leroy
yes.
Brown.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's it. Thank you.
That's a good jam there. I'm here to bail you out here. I was there. Okay. One more person in the basement than some big American is, but Mark Jordan has been here.
Mark is a magnificent creature. He's brilliant. He's so talented. I think Mark suffers from insecurity about.
Is that why he's so low key? Because he sat there. His wife was even here, right? So Amy Sky's here, and I felt sometimes I wanted to like jolt him with some electricity to wake him up a little bit. Like Mark was so laid back. He was so chill.
Yeah,
I found him like he's kind of like
he is. He's incredibly laid back, but I think underneath that, it's like I think he kind of. I don't know. Mark is a what is the word? What's the phrase? He's an enigma wrapped
in a riddle.
Yeah. I think so.
He'd be an interesting subject, though. There's rumors out there might be a documentary about Mark. So stay tuned. But I don't know how much I'm allowed to say in public. But I think he'd be an interesting subject for such a documentary.
Oh, are you kidding me? Totally.
I wouldn't kid you, Jane. Are you kidding me? Okay. I'm seeing my response to kidding you is, are you kidding me? That was just natural. Okay. So shout out to Mark. I almost called him Mark Crawford. Mark Crawford was a former NHL coach who, I don't know. We were talking about the 1998. That's right. Randy Drusen. We talked about 1998. There was a shootout against the Czech Republic, and Wayne Gretzky wasn't chosen to shoot, even though he was the NHL leader and all-time leader in goals. Mark Crawford kept him on the bench. So shout out to Mark Crawford, but that's Mark Jordan. All right. Just a couple big names. John Prine.
I don't know how many weeks I worked with John, and he became a very dear friend.
Wow.
He worked. He was just out of the army. He had an ulcer. He was married to Anne at the time, his childhood sweetheart, I understand, and he was pretty much he was learning the guitar as he played. I think you know what I mean. He wasn't very good at guitar. His songs, oh my God! The first week he played, we did Mondays, we did Tuesdays through Sunday were our weeks. So Monday was a dark day, and I think Bernie did Hootenanny nights or whatever, you know. But I didn't do that when I was there. I had one night off a week, you know, because you need to do things like that. But I mean. That wasn't an issue. It was just I never did the Monday nights, except when Harry Chapin played, because we had to do a Monday night with Harry Chapin to set up for the week. But no, Prine every week he played the Riverboat. Every time he played the Riverboat, it was a week, and I worked with him and got to know him very well.
Amazing.
And a funny human being, and a delight, absolute delight. And I have a great story to tell you about Prine and Goodman, if you wanted me to.
Yeah, please.
This Steve Goodman also, because he was managed by Al Bonetta, as well as John. So I have a couple of stories. Okay, when they met Chris Christopherson, no, they knew Chris. Chris knew them and had found them in Chicago, and he was a big fan of both of them. And at Paul Anka, he talked to Paul Anka and he said, "You got to hear these guys." Paul Anka was. This is how I learned it from John and Steve. So I think it's true. So Paul Anka was playing at the hotel, the Plaza Hotel in New York, and he was doing a residency or whatever it was, and so. Christopherson got to him and said, "You've got to meet these guys. They're amazing songwriters, blah, blah, blah." So he arranged for what's his face to Anchor to accept them to come to the hotel and have a meeting with him in his suite. And so they arrived, and they were two scruffy kids from Midwest, I guess you'd say, and they went to the front desk said, "May I help you?" You know, like that kind of attitude, like just snotty-nosed kids. "We don't want your type in here." And so they said, "Yeah, we're here to see Mr. Anchor. We have a meeting with him." And he said, "I will check." So he called up to the suite, and whoever it was said, "Yes, they're invited. They have a meeting." So they went up to the whatever floor of the hotel, which Anchor had the main floor of, I think, of the top, and they went into the rooms, and he met them, and he was getting ready to do his first show of the evening. And so, according to both of John and Steve, they both told me this. He listened to them, and he said, "Well, I've got to go do my show, but I'll be back up in the after the first show. In the meantime, call room service and order what you want, and see what you come up with. If you feel like writing a song, great." So off he went to do his show, and they kind of went, "Room service, we haven't had a lot of those things in our lives." So they ordered everything, including an awful. I think that's where the origin of kneeling before the porcelain altar may have come in from Steve. But they ordered everything, and they drank a lot, and then they started writing. The song that was Mother Prison, Christmas, Dog, Train, Truck. I think that was the one where the father was in prison for murder, and Mother Truck went into a train, and the dog died, and so this was that song, I think. So then they wrote that song, and then Paul Anka came up, and so he put his. And I have the card still from his younger brother, who was, I think, 19 or 20. Paul Anka decided that Andy Anka would be on the road with the boys, not together because they weren't performing together, but like whenever one went out, they would. So I think it was. I can't remember whether it was John or Steve that he was out on the road with, but it was to me, and thanking us at the Riverboat for being so kind, and it may have been Steve. Wow. Anyway, so that went, and then so he put Andy in there, and he managed them for a short while, and I think it was like not his forte, or he felt like I don't know what happened, but I don't think it was bad. I think it just didn't work, And then Al Bonetta was their manager forever, and Al Bonetta and Dan Rubin. Maybe it was his last, that was the active management team for both Steve and John, and were there for it all. And they started Oh Boy Records with John. And I think I know Steve was on a couple of the albums. His albums were on Oh Boy. And those guys loved each other so much. That wasn't the story. The story I wanted to tell you was like in, I think, 97, 98, and Rob Bennett, wonderful Canadian Rob Bennett, who was one of the best agents, who put his heart and soul into who he worked with. He didn't work with just anybody. In other words, he didn't put his money at risk buying shows at Convocation Hall or and putting them on, or Massey or wherever. He had John and Steve doing a show at Con Hall, and he knew that I knew them very well, obviously, because he'd known them from the Riverboat days, and he'd invited me to go, and he said it would be great to have you there at the place. And I was working at Eastern Sound at the time, and so and so I was going home, and I lived in Kensington Market, and I got a call on the home phone, and he said, "Hi, Jane, it's Rob." I went, "Oh, hey, Rob, I just got home. I'm just going to have a quick bite and a shower and whatever." And he said, "How long do you think you're going to be?" And this was like around 6:30, 7 o'clock, maybe 7:30 actually. I'm not sure. I've lost track of time on that. Yeah. But and I said, well, I'll be there as soon as I can. Is it urgent? He said, well, he said, Steve, and we knew that Steve had been diagnosed with further cancer. So it was a year or so, but it was 80 something. It wasn't 90.
Okay.
It was 81, 82, something like that, or 89. No, 78, 79, 80, somewhere in there. And Steve had been diagnosed with the cancer. It had come back, and he was on borrowed time. He was opening, and he said, Steve, yeah, it would be great if you could come soon, because Steve's been on the show for a long time, and John's been drinking a bit, and I don't feel comfortable letting Steve off the stage yet. So I said, okay, I'll be there. So I forewent dinner and the shower, and I hurried over because it was closed. And I got there, and Rose said, oh, thank God you're back. I think you're here. So I could hear Steve on stage. And so I said, well, why don't I take John for a walk on the fields? He said, that's a great idea. So I said, hey, John, how you doing? And we hugged, and because I knew him for a long time. And he was holding one of those plastic mugs that hold the Labatt's Blue or whatever, had the signage on them at the side. Sure. And so I said, what you drinking? He said, have a taste. And so I did, and it was vodka and an ice cube or two, and that was it pretty much. And so I said, okay, let's go for a walk. And so he said, oh, that's sure, that's great. So he's in his little lifted boots, he's worked boots with the fancy cowboy boots with. Right. And so we walked out and we walked around, and I'd hold the cup and I'd sip and I'd spill, and then he'd say, give me another taste. So he'd have another swig, and then I'd take it back. And then finally I felt like he could be okay to go on. And so we went back in, and Steve was like, oh, thank God. It's been a long night already. and so anyway, so then we did the show, and then I happened to mention to either or both of them that Maria Muldaur was playing at El Macambo that night upstairs. So I said, oh, that'd be great to go see Maria. So I called Mike Elder, and I said, Mike, can you accommodate a couple of people, me and two? He said, well, it depends. I said, well, it's John Prine and Steve Goodwin. He said, yeah, we can. So then he managed to get a photographer, and I don't remember which one it was, to come down. And I have the picture of them and Maria sitting under Lena Lovich's poster at the Elmo. Wow. And anyway, so then Rob Bennett had booked them into the Westbury Hotel, the one on Bay Street. I think it was the Westbury. Anyway, it was the hotel where all the film festival and all the guests stayed. And so then they talked to Bonnie, and Bonnie and Steve was drinking still, but not like excessively. But John was pretty straight by then because he'd been doing his show. So then they said, let's go back to the hotel. They had adjoining suites or whatever. So somehow in the time that they had arrived during the day, they'd managed to get a full bar going upstairs in the room between the rooms. And we went, and Maria said, come Maria, let's go to hotel. And she said, well, I've got my band, and said, well, the band, where's the band? She said, well, they're in the bus. And so I didn't say anything, but I left it to them, and they said, no, just you, come, it'd be great to hang and get caught up with you. So the four of us went back to the hotel, and then they said to Bonnie, here, have a drink. She said, no, I'd found God. She'd found God, and she said, he's so close to you. I can feel it. All you have to do is accept him. And John and Steve kind of looked at each other, and they started singing their anti-Jesus songs. Sure. And then they kept saying, have a drink, have a toke. And she said, no. And then about 5 a.m, she said, okay, well, I'll have a little thing. And I forget what she had. And then we had to get her in a taxi to go find the bus, the band bus, and because they were playing in London that night. And I always remember that. It was like a magical experience. And
Steve gone far too soon. Steve
Way
Goodman,
too soon.
36 when he died in 1984.
84, and he was but he had cancer, leukemia when he first played the boat. And Bernie and I had to know that in case, because he had to do every 2 weeks in New York to get blood transfusions.
Yeah, leukemia. Yeah,
Then he got other cancers in the 80s. But in the meantime, he and Steve and Nancy, his wife, who is a nurse or was a nurse, and to Steve's 4'10" or whatever, she was 5'10" or something, and they would loved each other madly. I'd never met her, but anyways, because of Steve's leukemia and the treatments, he couldn't father a child, and so they adopted Jessie, and right from the birth hospital, and then when he went into remission and he could stop all the meds, he became able to father. So they had 2 more of their own. So yes, it was way too soon.
36,
and the last album has a song called Rowboat, When My Rowboat Comes In, and it's all. And he sent me. It was vinyl in those days, and he sent me a copy, and I got it, and I put it on, and I just fell apart.
Wow.
And I called, and I just said, "You've done me in for the day," you know.
Well, not on this bummer note here. Another gentleman we lost far too soon, Tim Buckley.
Tim Buckley. He did play the Riverboat, and nobody knows Tim, right? Because they will think of
Jeff. His son. Yeah, right. Who also gone too soon.
Yeah, I never got to know him. You know who, as somebody who's been in service situations a lot, you know when somebody wants to. I could tell you the people who didn't and the people who did from the boat, like Townes Van Zandt. Townes was one of the most tortured people I've ever come across. Phil Oakes was another one of that. But Phil, the last time he played, you know Phil Oakes?
Oh, of course. Yeah. He wrote Changes.
Yes. Apparently on the steps of the grab bag next.
And shout out to Ron Hawkins from Lowest to the Low, who kicked out some Phil Oakes when he kicked out the jams on Toronto Mic'd. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's a big inspiration to Ron Hawkins. Not the Rompin' Ron, the Lowest to the Low Ron.
Oh, really?
Yeah, big inspiration, yeah.
The last time Phil played the boat, it was 2 weeks, and he was on A&M. And it was a few months before he, and I'm pretty sure he did kill himself. I'm pretty sure he felt he'd lost the creative, I think is what happened after he wrote all those songs of the anti-war. But anyway, that last 2 weeks, every night, he was so nervous before he would go on stage, and he and I would, and he didn't drink, and he and I would walk around the back parking lot. I'd walk with him, and he had a beer, and he'd have beer, and then he'd be able to get rid of it because he got sick, and he had the courage to go on stage. And then he had this Elvis suit, the white Elvis suit.
Sure, the jumpsuit there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he'd leave the stage at the end of the show, and he'd get the applause, and people, and he'd give him long enough to change into the Elvis suit, and he'd come back and he'd be Elvis, and he'd be like engaged, and and the audience would like, oh my God, every night.
Wow, yeah, he did sadly take his own life there, and he was only 35. So
my God,
we gotta move on. There's such bummer stuff. So I realize now how much time I've taken, and I know there's so much more. So a couple of choice names, and then we're gonna sort of just talk really quickly about Hugh's Room and what you did with the Ontario Place Forum, and just really do a tidy up. I know we spent a lot of time on Riverboat because I'm so fascinated by the history of that coffee house in this city.
It was,
and of course you'll have to shout out Jane Harbury publicity, and
well, I'm
still doing that.
So I'm still doing it, but I've sort of but I'm not. I got rid of the Publicity Inc. thing because it's me. I mean, I used to have doing the Junos and the all those shows and all that.
So you did the 93 Juno Awards. You handled the publicity for Juno Awards in 1993, and then 95 and 96.
Many years.
And then 99 and 2000. Yeah, I'm seeing it now. Okay. So here, did you have any encounters with the legend that was John Lee Hooker?
Oh, yeah, for sure. John Lee Hooker was Oh my God, he was one of the magical people. He couldn't tune his own guitar, so seriously, so the kitchen guy, Greg, was played the guitar. So I know that when Greg was there, he could tune the guitar for him. Also, John Lee Hooker. Oh, you'll love this story. Yeah. When he arrived at the boat, he'd come in with one of those cardboard containers of beer, bottles of beer. And he'd put it down and he'd say, "Okay, can you open them up and pour the beer away?" And then he had bottles of, I don't know, I'm gonna not have the actual recall, but it was some kind of liqueur or liquor. Right. It might have been whiskey. It probably was whiskey. And so it was whiskey because I know I've exactly remembered. Okay, so then he would have the whiskey poured into the bottles and recapped, and then he would have them in the fridge, and then he'd call out from the. No, he didn't call out. We knew what he wanted when he asked could he have another drink, and it would be whiskey. Oh no, it was. He did call it out. He'd go, "Can I have another beer?" So we knew that the beer wasn't there. So it had whiskey. And what we'd do is put it into a glass or whatever and pour milk in it. Whiskey and milk. So when he said beer, when he said beer, it was whiskey and whiskey and milk. And the first time we had to make it, it was like, "Are you kidding me?" But then we realized that it was not beer. So he would ask for that. I'll tell you another person who used to do funny things on the mic was Jerry Jeff Walker. He would call out, "Could I have a, could Jane," and he'd say my name, which was embarrassing because over the mic, he'd say, "Jane, could you bring me another picnic hamper?" Or it would be a picnic basket or whatever it was, one it was, it would be something and something. So one would be a beer and shots of whiskey, and the other would be something else. And I had to know what he was actually asking for every time.
Jerry Jeff Walker. Now, okay, John Lee Hooker, all these three named people. Okay, so how do I map up this great, legendary career of Jane Harbury? So, okay, so maybe talk a little bit about Hugh's Room. You're still handling publicity for Hugh's Room, right?
Yes.
So, for example, remind people, so there was a Hugh's Room relocated, am I right? So this is now, tell us, where is Hugh's Room now?
Hugh's Room now is 296 Broadview Avenue in Toronto. So we moved from the west to the east, which has pleased a lot of the East Enders, but has really ticked off some of the...
Toronto's funny that way, right? You're either, because you're on the west here now, so it's you're either an East Ender or a West Ender.
Well, they're getting the acts that they want to hear, so they have to make the journey now, and it's not like a crawl home; it's like a journey.
Right, right. So, shout out some of the artists who you have who are booked for Hugh's Room. I did just have Alfie Zappacosta on the program, and he shouted out Hugh's Room. So, shout out any artists that are booked to play Hugh's Room.
Where do you start? Iris Dement. Iris Dement is one of the most talented women I have ever, and the most wonderful. She's like, you've gone to Bible church, and she sings like that, and she plays she loves the upright piano, and she plays it like a Bible thumper, but it's not Bible. She's like current about being pissed off about. Oh, sorry.
You can swear on this. This is not the radio, so go nuts.
Okay.
Go nuts.
About Trump, for example. You can't, she
you have to swear when you talk about Trump, right? Come on.
Yeah, you can't avoid it. Regulars still are Harry Manx. Harry Manx is one of the most talented and lovely people. Oh God, I mean, everybody has played Hugh's Room who was able. Ian Tyson would come often. Ian was funny. People would line up to get autographs, and they'd say, "Could you sign it too?" He said, I sign my name. I do not do anything else. You put into who it's for. And that was mainly because he's had crippling arthritis, I think, in his hands. But he was great. He was so professional. He was, and of course Sylvia. Gordon, of course, used to come every year for the Lightfoot tributes, and he never played on his own. He would play. He would come down. He started it way back when Jory first started The Way We Feel, Jory Nash. And Gordon he'd come in and he'd sneak in after the show had started usually, but some people would be waiting because they didn't know which night of the 4 or 5 nights he would come, right?
Right.
And he'd always get a standing ovation, and the artists on stage understood, and but Gordon would eventually he'd play one of the artists' guitars and do a track, and then later on he'd bring his own guitar and do it. But he always went and talked to each of the artists and gave them an encouraging word, because all of the songs they did were his, of course.
Right. Amazing. Okay, so Jane, what website for Hugh's Room if we wanted to send people to
www.hughsroomlive.com or at Hughes or Hugh, however it goes with the www. Hughsroomlive.com.
Hughsroomlive.com. Amazing. It was amazing collecting these stories. Rob Pruce, who played keyboards with Spoons, tells me he introduced me recently to Bob Roper.
Oh, Bob is wonderful.
And he says you're a friend of Bob. So maybe if you say anything nice about Bob, I can actually play it for him when he visits. I think he's here next Monday.
Oh, good. Bob is one of the very special people. He loved the artists he worked with when he was at the label. He's got great stories. He's such a kind human being. Bob and I are very lucky. We go to a Jays game early each year. We're given a pair of tickets by, I don't want to say the name because he knows who he is, and I appreciate him and Bob appreciates him. And we have an afternoon, and Bob, it's a mandatory, we take a picture of us with the Sky Dome or whatever.
Sure.
And with the CN Tower, usually if it's open. Bob is like, he's a do-gooder. He cares a lot about, he adored Rob Bennett. He worked for Rob Bennett after he had time. And he was very close with Rob Bennett. And he's a carer. He's a lovely human being. He's got a wonderful wife who he adores. And they go on adventures, and I think the world of Bob. He's also very strong in his opinions. If he gets angry about something, you know it. But that's Bob. He doesn't take it home with him, I think is what they would say.
Well, I can't wait to meet Bob. I'm glad we had this long form chat. I'm sure it's just tip of the iceberg. I'm sure we'll have to do a sequel at some point and collect the rest of these. But Jane, and I'm trying to figure out now what we'll talk when I wrap this up here. We'll see what you can carry home with you, because I've got so much swag for you. And I realize, you're taking the TTC. So I might have to bike some of these goodies to you. We'll discuss this later. But Jane, thanks so much for dropping by and making your Toronto Mike debut.
I'm very glad to have done this, and I love the space. This is a fabulous little studio.
And good space. Not quite the Riverboat Coffee House, but
it would fit. This would fit in the.
It's in a basement.
It wouldn't fit in the kitchen because of all the equipment, but it would fit on. It wouldn't fit. It would fit on the stage, actually. Yeah, it would. And the ceilings the ceilings at the boat were higher. Amazing, Jane. By the way, quick, before I do my little outro, I was looking at all these great songs that reference the name Jane, and I was wondering if you have a preference. Here are the two I'm going to ask you about. The Velvet Underground, of course, have the wonderful song Sweet Jane. Yes. I love that song. And Cowboy Junkies do a great cover, of course. But. Of course, yes. Well, Sweet Jane, I mean, I don't know why, but that's what people call me now, and I don't think I'm sweet. I think I'm a bit of a bitch at times, but but at the same time, you have to be in this business, So Sweet Jane, I don't know what can ever beat that, but I will shout out Lady Jane by the Rolling Stones is also a pretty good ditty there. So, do you have a favorite Jane song? I love the Stones song. And Rainer Schwartz used to play it all the time for me on Chum FM.
Of course, Chum FM, and then I
then
remember Rainer Schwartz on CFNY.
Yes.
And then now it's all back to James B, because now I'm thinking of Danny Elwell, who loved working with Rainer Schwartz. Danny
Yes.
Elwell is on Jazz FM. And of course, that's where you get the great, I was going to say the great Bob Scott. No, of the great James B. And it all comes back to the very famous James B. Jane?
It's an endless but small circle. Or endless and small. No, it's all of that.
It's endless, but I'm going to see if it's bottomless. I'm going to try to get as many people in this circle as possible to visit me and tell the stories. So,
yes.
Jane, you're a key part of that. And as Neil would say, keep on rocking in the free world.
I think we should try and get a free world, is what I think. That my hope is that people in the States come to their senses in a hurry.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,448th show. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Toronto Mike. Jane, do you want to send people to? Is there a Jane Harbury portal on the World Wide Web we could send people to? Do you have or just follow you on Facebook? Where's the best place to follow you? Do you post on any social media, Jane? This is not a trick question.
I'm on Facebook a lot.
Facebook for Jane Harbury. That's where you go.
Yeah.
Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, Palma Pasta, RecycleMyElectronics.ca, Raymond James Canada, the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. The season starts at Christie Pitts on May 12th, and stay tuned because I plan to be there, and you should too. And Ridley Funeral Home. See you all tomorrow when Kevin Howes is my special guest.